Sarah Coleman was a woman who prided herself on her practical, no-nonsense approach to life. As an emergency room nurse, she had spent over a decade immersed in the raw, unfiltered reality of human fragility. Her world revolved around science, facts, and the tangible. Faith and the metaphysical held no place in her carefully structured reality. To her, life was a series of certainties, measured in heartbeats and medical charts. But life, as it often does, had its own plans. It was the morning of April 3, 2023. The night before, Sarah had barely slept, her mind tangled with thoughts of her son's soccer game, unfinished chores, and the endless responsibilities of her day-to-day existence. By dawn, she decided she needed clarity, a way to quiet the mental storm. So, at 5 a.m., she laced up her running shoes and stepped out into the crisp morning air. Before continuing, I wanted to ask you a quick favor. Our goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers here on YouTube, and your help is very important. So if you subscribe and comment subscribed, I will respond to your comment as a thank you. Thank you very much for your support. Now let's continue. The neighborhood was tranquil, draped in a soft fog that gave the streets an almost ethereal quality. It was the kind of quiet that made even the smallest sounds, her footsteps against the pavement, the rustling of leaves, feel amplified. Sarah glanced at her smartwatch. 5:12 a.m. The world felt utterly ordinary. But in the blink of an eye, that ordinariness shattered. The driver, distracted by their phone, didn't see Sarah crossing the street. The car hit her with a force that sent her body crumpling to the pavement. The impact should have ended everything right there. It was as though time itself paused, holding its breath. And yet, Sarah's story didn't end with that moment of collision. It was only beginning. What she expected was the void, the silence of nothingness, the final curtain call. But the reality was far different. For Sarah Coleman, death was not the end, it was a doorway. For Sarah Coleman, the expected void of death never arrived. Instead, she found herself in a place so extraordinary it defied any description she could have imagined. It began with light, not the harsh clinical brightness she knew from hospital rooms, but a radiance that was soft, alive, and all-encompassing. This light didn't merely illuminate her surroundings. It penetrated her very being, filling her with a peace so profound it felt as if every worry, every fear, every burden she had ever carried was gently lifted away. The air itself seemed to hum with a melody, a sound that wasn't heard so much as felt, resonating deeply within her soul. Vibrant colors danced around her, hues she couldn't name, so vivid they seemed to breathe. There was a warmth, not from the light, but from the place itself, as though it welcomed her home after a long journey. And then, from within the light, a figure began to emerge. It was her father, who had passed away when Sarah was still a teenager. He looked younger, healthier, and more vibrant than she had ever remembered. His face radiated the same peace that enveloped the entire place. Sarah instinctively recognized him, and the familiarity brought an overwhelming rush of emotions. "Sarah," he said, his voice rich with love and warmth. "You don't need to be afraid." Tears welled in her eyes as he stepped closer, reaching out to take her hand. The touch wasn't physical in the way she understood, but it connected them so profoundly that words felt unnecessary. In that moment, every unanswered question she had ever had about him seemed to dissolve, replaced by a deep, unspoken understanding. "There's something you need to see," her father said, his tone gentle but urgent. Before Sarah could respond, the light surrounding them grew even brighter, intensifying to a brilliance that should have been blinding but wasn't. And then, in the midst of this brilliance, another figure stepped forward. What she saw next would forever change her understanding of life, death, and everything in between. It was him. As Sarah stood in awe, the figure before her became unmistakable. It was Jesus. Yet, he wasn't like any depiction she had ever seen. There were no painted halos or robes borrowed from art history. Instead, his presence was both deeply human and profoundly divine, radiating an authority and love that were almost overwhelming. His eyes were what captivated her the most. They were deep, endless, and filled with compassion that seemed to hold the entirety of her being. In them, she saw her past, her struggles, her joys, and even the person she was meant to become. It wasn't just a gaze, it was as though he truly knew her, every fiber of her existence laid bare. Sarah felt her knees buckle, and she knelt, not out of fear, but out of a sense of reverence she had never experienced before. She wasn't asked to kneel, it simply felt like the only response possible in his presence. "Sarah," he said, his voice gentle yet imbued with authority, "you have been brought here to see and to understand. There is a message my people need to hear." Before she could fully comprehend his words, he stretched out his hand. As he did, the light around them shifted, and suddenly, Sarah was no longer standing in that radiant place. Instead, she was shown a series of visions, each one more vivid and profound than the last. The first vision, he called the Great Distraction. Sarah saw the world consumed by technology. People sat together but were apart, their faces glued to glowing screens. Families no longer talked, they scrolled. Even those who professed faith were ensnared by the noise, their prayers drowned out by the endless pull of meaningless tasks. Jesus turned to her and said, "This is how the enemy works, by keeping them distracted, blind to what truly matters." Next came the Great Deception. Beings of extraordinary beauty and charisma appeared, promising peace and enlightenment. Their words were enticing, mixing truths with subtle lies, drawing even the faithful into their grasp. "They are not of me," Jesus warned. "They will lead many astray. My people must remain rooted in my word." The third vision brought hope. Waves of light spread across the world as people turned back to God. It was the Great Awakening, where miracles abounded, and communities came alive with worship and repentance. But this came with persecution. Believers were mocked, attacked, and even killed for their faith. "Stand firm," Jesus urged. "The reward is eternal." Finally, Sarah witnessed the great return. The sky split open, and Jesus descended in glory, surrounded by legions of angels. The entire world stopped. Every knee bowed, some in awe, others in terror. "Tell them," he said, his voice unwavering, "I am coming soon." The visions ended, leaving Sarah trembling, tears streaming down her face. Jesus placed his hand on her shoulder, his gaze filled with reassurance. "This is not yours to carry alone. My Spirit will guide you." The brilliance surrounding Sarah began to shift, the radiant light receding as if being drawn into a single point. The warmth and peace that had enveloped her started to fade, replaced by an awareness of something else, pain. It was faint at first, a distant sensation, but it grew stronger with every passing moment. Jesus stood before her, his gaze steady and filled with an unspoken promise. "Now, Sarah," he said, his voice carrying both gentle reassurance and urgency. "It is time for you to go back. Your work is not finished." Before she could respond, she felt a pull, a force that seemed to draw her away from the celestial realm. It was disorienting, like being pulled through a tunnel of light and sound, yet there was no fear. As the sensations intensified, she realized she was returning, back to the world she thought she had left behind. The first thing she noticed was the searing pain in her chest, like fire igniting deep within her lungs. She gasped, struggling to draw in air, her body heaving with the effort. Slowly, her senses returned. Voices surrounded her, urgent, hurried voices. When she opened her eyes, she was greeted by the shocked faces of paramedics. "She's back," one of them exclaimed, a mix of relief and disbelief in their tone. Sarah's gaze darted around, trying to make sense of what had happened. The pain, the chaos, the weight of gravity, it was all jarring after the serenity she had just experienced. Tears streamed down her face, but they weren't from the physical agony. They were from the overwhelming gratitude she felt for what she had seen and heard. Though her body was battered, her spirit was stronger than ever, infused with a purpose she couldn't yet put into words. Sarah's return to the physical world was nothing short of miraculous. Though her injuries were significant, a concussion, broken ribs, and deep bruises, her recovery defied medical explanation. Doctors marveled at how quickly her body healed, as though her resilience came from some unseen source. But Sarah knew the truth. Her recovery was a testament to the strength she had been given for the mission ahead. Adjusting to life after her experience was not easy. The weight of what she had seen and heard pressed heavily on her. How could she explain something so profoundly otherworldly to people who might dismiss it as a hallucination or the product of trauma? And yet, she couldn't ignore the words Jesus had spoken. "Tell them." She began with her closest family and friends. At first, her words came hesitantly, as though she feared rejection or disbelief. She described the light, the presence of her Father, the overwhelming love she felt, and the visions Jesus had shown her. Some listened in awe, their eyes wide with wonder as she spoke. Others were more skeptical, their silence betraying a quiet disbelief. A few even dismissed her outright, suggesting that her experience was a trick of the brain or a side effect of the accident. But Sarah remained steadfast. Every time doubt crept in, every time she questioned whether her story would be received, she remembered the warmth of Jesus' gaze and the clarity of his words. "This is not yours to carry alone. My Spirit will guide you." Over time, Sarah found that opportunities to share her message arose naturally. Conversations with strangers turned into moments of deep connection. Friends confided in her, sharing their struggles, fears, and questions about life's purpose. Each time, Sarah spoke from the heart, planting seeds of hope and faith in those who were willing to listen. Still, the mission was not without its challenges. There were moments when Sarah questioned her own sanity. Was it possible that what she experienced was not real? Was she simply clinging to a comforting illusion? In these moments of doubt, she would close her eyes and recall the visions, the unwavering presence of Jesus, and the love that had filled her being. It was enough to keep her moving forward. Her story began to ripple outward. She was invited to speak at small gatherings, at churches, among friends, even with colleagues curious about her miraculous recovery. Each time, she felt the weight of responsibility but also the profound joy of fulfilling her purpose. It wasn't about convincing anyone, it was about sharing the truth as she had experienced it and trusting God to do the rest. As Sarah looked back on everything she had experienced, she realized that her journey wasn't just about the miraculous visions or the profound peace she had felt, it was about the transformation those moments had brought to her life. She had returned to a world still filled with doubt, pain, and distraction, yet she carried within her a clarity and purpose that nothing could shake. The words of Jesus echoed in her heart daily, "I am coming soon. Tell them to be ready." Those words had become her guiding light, shaping every decision and interaction. She no longer saw her life through the lens of the temporary. Instead, she was focused on the eternal, on the things that truly mattered. Sarah also understood that the message she carried wasn't just hers, it belonged to everyone. It was a call to wake up, to refocus, to prepare for what was to come. She didn't claim to have all the answers, but she knew the one who did, and that was enough. Every day, she prayed that her story would reach those who needed to hear it, planting seeds of faith, hope, and love. Sarah's life had become a living testimony to the truth she had witnessed, a truth that continues to shine, even in the darkest of times. Leave your opinion in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that we can reach the mark of 1,000 subscribers. With your help we will be able to reach this number as quickly as possible. Thank you for being there and next time.